I want to welcome everyone to the second installment of the 2012-2013 NYU Reynolds Social Entrepreneurship in the 21st Century Speaker Series. I am absolutely thrilled to be able to welcome to the NYU Reynolds stage tonight some new and some old friends. John Wood, founder and co-chair of Room to Read, Anne-Marie Burgoyne, a portfolio manager at Draper Richards Kaplan, and Christy Chin, also a portfolio manager, a portfolio director at Draper Richards Kaplan. We're going to have an outstanding discussion tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit more about their backgrounds in just a minute. I did want to start by recognizing the fact that this particular speaker series event is a little bit special for two important reasons. The first reason is that it's the culmination of John Wood's NYU Reynolds sponsored class, Capital Acquisition and Scale in Social Entrepreneurship. One of the fundamental purposes of the NYU Reynolds program is really to serve as a hub of social entrepreneurial activity at NYU, and a very important part of that mission is creating new cross-university classes, meaning business students, studying with law students, studying with artists, et cetera, at the graduate and undergraduate level to help them understand what the social entrepreneurial landscape really looks like and help them to better prepare for it. So when I approached John a while back and asked him to design and teach a class, I was thrilled that he agreed, and I wanted to extend a special welcome to many of his students who are joining us tonight. I think the second thing that makes this event particularly special has to do with the topic and the kind of practical focus of the conversation. The social entrepreneurial community or movement or profession, whatever it actually is, and the jury's still kind of out on that, has really kind of fetishized this notion of scale. The thinking goes, if you haven't had a huge impact, you're not really a social entrepreneur, and it's something that's really kind of gotten baked in to this evolving DNA of social entrepreneurship. And there's an important reason for that. This go big or go home is really needed if these giant problems are going to be tackled. What the social entrepreneurial community hasn't been so clear about is how do you operate, how do you organize, and how do you access the capital that are such critical parts to the scaling equation. And that's what tonight is really all about. On this stage, we have an incredible breadth and depth of knowledge around the notions of capital and scale. John Wood founded Room to Read, distributed over, I don't want to get the number wrong, 11 million books, has provided long-term scholarships to over 16,800 girls around the world, has raised over $125 million, and
higher.
It's higher. What's the latest? No, I can't keep up.
200 million.
$200 million, and while he wasn't busy with that, wrote a great award-winning memoir, Leaving Microsoft to Change the World, which is required reading for anybody who's interested in the space. Anne-Marie Burgoyne is somebody who's responsible for identifying and supporting Draper Richards Kaplan entrepreneurs. And if anyone had the opportunity to take a quick glance at the portfolio, it's going to reveal how good she and her team is at this. Room to Read, Kiva, Visionspring, 1 Acre Fund, Upwardly Global, these are just a few of the organizations that Draper Richards Kaplan decided to take a chance on, both with capital and technical assistance. And Christy Chin also works to support Draper Richards entrepreneurs and cultivates and engages donors by creating new funds. Prior to joining Draper, she helped high net worth individuals develop effective outcome-focused philanthropic strategies through TPW West. She also served as a senior program officer at the Skoll Foundation, you might have heard of that, and has high-level experience in the VC world as a former principal of Bedrock Capital Partners and director of business development for the Frontier Group. So what we have here on the stage is really 3 legs of the stool. You've got a great social entrepreneur who needs funds to achieve this massive scale that the problem he is working on really demands. You've got an individual who focuses on finding who the best social entrepreneurs are and deciding which one are worth taking this calculated risk on. We've got a limited pool of capital. We've got a limited pool of resources. And then an individual who knows capital inside and out and is working tirelessly to make sure funds are actually available for those social entrepreneurs that are worth betting on. I know we're going to learn a lot about capital and scale tonight in a very practical way. We have this great privilege to kind of eavesdrop on their conversation and then participate in it. And I encourage everybody to do that during the Q&A session. You could write down your questions on the cards, and we're also going to have mic runners, so please participate in that. And give a very warm NYU Reynolds welcome to John Wood, Anne-Marie Burgoyne, and Christy Chin.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. And since I see we're all honored that it's standing room only, but it doesn't need to be, let's do a quick matchmaking exercise. Anybody standing over there wants chairs? There's a couple here. There's a few over here. So I know you're being really polite and not cutting across. But this is New York, after all. So honk your horn. Grab a seat. We'll just give them about 45 seconds or so to do that so they're not having to stand. Great. Quickly, this is New York. Okay, well, I'm actually going to move this also so I can say hi to people over there. I'm not having. So I'm really excited, Christy and Anne-Marie, that you're here. I realize you had to catch the dreaded fake red eye from the West Coast, which is the only flight they insist upon serving you a meal on these days when you're trying to sleep. So thank you for being here. I got you these flowers. I hope that you like those. So I've known Anne-Marie now for over 5 years. I was very pleased to serve with her on the One Acre Fund board, a complete entrepreneurial success story that we'll talk about. I met Christy about 10 years ago when she was new at the Skoll Foundation, and the Skoll Foundation was new, and I was new at Room to Read, and Room to Read was new. And I showed up basically hoping that the Skoll Foundation would fund us. We wanted to actually double dip, that we wanted to be a Draper Richards Fellow and a Skoll Fellow, and I'm happy to say that we were successful at that. So it's great to see you both here, and I was telling our class tonight that when Gabe asked me to do this course that was a joint kind of Stern-Wagner course, I made a list of the 3 people I most wanted to have as guest lecturers, the 2 of them and Charles Best from Donors Choose. And we went 3 for 3, so we've had a really good time with our class, and really enjoyed it. So anyway, both thank you for being here. Let me start, Anne-Marie, with you. You know, Draper Richards has a very unique model that a social entrepreneur applies. Lots apply, few are chosen, unfortunately, because it's a great model and everybody wants to be chosen. You give $100,000 a year of unrestricted capital, which is the best capital any social entrepreneur can have, unrestricted capital. That you trust the entrepreneur, that's what you give them. You're with them for 3 years. $100,000 a year. You take a board seat to give them some guidance and understand what's going on, getting in the engine room and figuring out what's going on, and then you exit out of it. Tell me, why is that the model? That there's lots of models that a foundation could take. Why is that the model, and why do you guys stick with it?
So in part, that's the model, and I want to make sure this is up high enough. In part, that's the model because our original funders, Bill Draper and Robin Richards, were venture capitalists and had explored a model that had very much to do with life stage of organization, a very specific, aggressive diligence process, and then sitting on people's boards as a way of stewarding an organization, helping to build capacity, and frankly, over time, doing good pattern recognition to see the support that would help one organization. How do you bring on a new COO? How do you build systems? Could actually help many organizations if they sat in that seat to do that work. And then the third piece of our model is about building a learning community, which is, of course, something a venture capital firm would never do. And that has helped to be the third leg of our stool in terms of support. The reason we've continued to do it is a few years ago when we set down the path of raising money so that we could be a funded foundation, and we'll talk more about that later, I think we found that our model had really worked. And that was both empirically we felt it had worked, and when we talked to people we'd funded, they specifically went through and highlighted the different pieces of the model and why they thought it had been beneficial to them.
Christy, tell us about, we're all in this room probably very data-driven. Give us Draper Richards today by the numbers.
By the numbers, okay. So the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation is now 11 years old, And we have a first fund, which we call the Founders Fund, which was $14 million. It funded 29 organizations, of which I think 26 are still operating today. Then we raised a second fund about 3 years ago that's $31 million. We expect to fund over 50 organizations out of that fund. And to date, we've funded 17, of which 16 are fully independent today. We have 9 people on staff. We grew by 3 people in the last month. And now we have both a West Coast office and soon to have an East Coast office in the Boston area. Address to be determined. So very early growth stage for us, an exciting time.
Have you hired for the Boston office yet?
We have hired for the Boston office.
I see a lot of disappointed faces in the crowd. But you're going to keep growing, right? So there will be future opportunities.
Exactly. The rate of growth is that we previously in the first year only funded 3 organizations, and this year we've funded 10 to date, and we might get up to 12.
Great. And you were telling me earlier, Anne-Marie, that in a typical year, let's just say last year, for example, you had about 800 applications from social entrepreneurs who wanted to be Draper Richards Fellows. 10 were ultimately chosen, so that's a success rate that is, or a rate that's equivalent to, let's say, Harvard Business School or something. Actually, it's tougher to get into Draper Richards than it is to get into Harvard Business School or Yale Law School, right? 10 out of 800 is pretty amazing. Give us an idea, maybe for both of you, and Christy, you can choose either from your old days in the school portfolio or today at Draper Richards. Give us 2 success stories of groups that came in that got early funding or middle stage funding that have just completely shocked you with their ability to scale, not only their organizations, but also their impact.
I think that the one I will select, which is a grant that we made in 2005, and which some of you might be familiar with because it's a New York home organization, is Visionspring, which was founded by a man named Jordan Cassellow. When we met Visionspring back in 2005, they'd literally probably distributed through sales using a micro-consignment model, training women to be micro-entrepreneurs, about 8,000 pairs of glasses, primarily working in Latin America, and then they'd recently opened an India office, and they'd gotten a World Bank World Marketplace award for doing that work in India. Jordan Cassellow was a mix of a person who'd worked in business, a person who'd worked in international NGO work, a consummate entrepreneur who had a vision around distributing glasses using a micro-enterprise model, but also was really, really willing to try all different sorts of iterations on his model. So when I look over time, there was the wholesale model, there was the individual woman model, there was the family model, there were models that had to do with mobile vans. And what I admired was Jordan tested all those models and with great operational thought, every single time increasing the number of glasses he was selling, tinkering with price points, tinkering with size of SKUs. And ultimately what's kind of exciting to me, to fast forward, is Visionspring over the last less than a decade has had 2 great successes. And one is they've actually distributed, through a sales model, 1 million pairs of glasses. Which if you think about the fact that each of those people who's probably suffering from presbyopia, they're probably in their mid-40s, they're taking care of their kids, they're probably taking care of their parents, it fundamentally allows them to take on whatever livelihood they've historically done and continue to do it. Makes a difference if you're a farmer or an accountant or a weaver. But the other thing that, that Visionspring has been able to do is create a sustainability model. So when Jordan looks at the way he does his work, a large portion of his money comes in from the social enterprise itself, covering the cost of the glasses. A certain portion of that is paid for through philanthropy that Jordan raises every year. A big slug of that comes from his Warby Parker partnership, which is itself a great success story. And then Jordan has really figured out who the philanthropists are that believe in social enterprise. And if you think about what Acumen's written about, understand the idea of how creating blueprints and creating ways to use philanthropy as a means of building foundations for social enterprises can fundamentally over time change the way business models work. So I think it's a huge success story. And we're really proud to be part of it.
And when he approached you initially, was it like him and his dog, or like what size was the organization then?
That organization then was Jordan, his COO, Graham McMillan, who now works at Citibank, and Neil, who now runs Warby Parker. And so went on to then actually become an entrepreneur, a for-profit entrepreneur, the staff of 3 people. And he had a board, which was his closest friend from boyhood, and David Bornstein, a noted social entrepreneurship writer. and a budget of about $200,000. And then he had sales staffs of women that were working in Nicaragua and several other Latin American countries, and this nascent effort in India. And now works in India, Bangladesh, a number of places in Africa, a number of places in Latin America, has staff all over the world that work on that effort.
Yeah, I remember when we first approached Draper Richards, we were literally 2 people, 2 desks, 2 really crappy laptops, and 1 cordless phone, and an underperforming space heater in the Presidio in San Francisco.
But clearly neither of you had a dog.
No, we were traveling too much to have a dog, so that was the issue. That was but it must be amazing though to see. I mean, so many people have dreams, and you're coming in and you're seeing these dreams at your early stage. Christy, I'm curious about, what's one of your favorite success stories where you've seen either the organization scale or the impact scale or both?
Well, first of all, I didn't say thank you for coming to hear us tonight instead of listening to the presidential debate. I just am really thrilled. I'm really impressed with the size of this room, so thank you so much. So I think I'll draw upon the Skoll Foundation's portfolio. When I joined in 2002, and the foundation was very new, we looked and said, we're going to focus on social entrepreneurship. Who are the organizations that are out there? And there were 3 that we funded that year. They were the first recipients of the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. So it was John Wood of Room to Read, and you know that story, I think, pretty well, or hear more about that today. And then Jim Fruchterman's organization, Benetech, which leverages proven technology to benefit humanity. And today they're the single largest provider of reading materials for the visually impaired. So they have a technology solution. They just won a $31 million grant from the government, from the Department of Ed, to expand, and they're expanding internationally. And their budget is now $12 million. So tremendous leverage there, and all earned income. Will pay a subscriber base. But I think the other one that we funded that year was College Summit, and continue to fund it today, which is J.B. Schramm. So he was in Washington, D.C., and was working with high school seniors to help them complete their college application. And his keen insight was that they were missing one critical ingredient that a middle-class family had, which was the nagging parent, who would say, I'm a veteran of the college application process. This is very important, and I'm going to help you complete that process. And what he found over time is that high school public schools had one college counselor that was trying to work across at a 100-to-1 ratio, and it just wasn't. They couldn't provide the kind of one-to-one nagging and follow-up that was needed. And so what he said is, there's a whole group of missing students who are college ready but are not going to college. And today, I believe that he's at a scale where he's partnered with school districts. He trains teachers. They deliver the curriculum in the classroom, so he's leveraging internal staff. And I believe his numbers are at least 50,000 students per year go to college that wouldn't otherwise go to college in the United States.
Pretty amazing. And how old is the organization?
I think it's 12 years old
12
now.
years old, yeah.
And I don't know the size of its budget, but I think it's in the, it's got to be, it's hard for nonprofits to get over 10 million. And then it's even harder to get where John is at Room to Read at 30 or north.
Whatever, we'll cover that later. I do want to say, though, if any of you have a nagging parent who needs something to do, perhaps volunteering for College Summit would be something that... Do they take nagging parents?
You can go for a weekend and help college seniors write their college essay.
There you go.
Coach them through it.
We're basically up here trying to be more amusing than Barack Obama and Mitt Romney tonight. So just so you know, if we crack a few jokes here and there, that's why. So you see a lot of success. You see stuff that doesn't work. But let's stick with the success for a minute. Two-part question: Is there the DNA of a successful social entrepreneur? Is there something in the DNA? If so, if you could name 1 or 2 strands of that DNA, what is it? You both have been in this now for over 2 combined decades. What have you seen? Is there something in the DNA?
There's definitely stuff in the DNA. And I'm not saying you can't acquire that stuff or nurture that stuff. I think one of the biggest pieces is the willingness to amass resources, money, people, social media ideas. But I think that both in part comes from the fact that you've processed your idea well enough where you know what you're doing, the It's easy to talk about your mission. It's easier to talk about what you do. But to have processed it to the point where you understand from a vision perspective what that means, that's when people really get captivated. But that's only a piece of it, right? Because a piece of it is you have to be willing to ask, and you have to see the opportunity is so fundamentally part of yourself that instead of that feeling uncomfortable, it feels both natural and sort of pressingly important. And so I think that's a piece of the DNA is, and I think about Dave Wish at Little Kids Rock, and I point to Gabe because he knows Dave really well. Dave's mission has been to bring music to public schools that no longer serve children with music. And if you talk to Dave, he'll talk about the power of training teachers to bring music to kids and bringing them instruments and a curriculum that's about helping kids to create their own music. He has all the patter. But what he's fundamentally trying to do is bring music back into society because societies that make music support each other and change happens. And he so deeply believes that he can't go anywhere. He can't even go to the grocery store without telling people about Little Kids Rock. And that's when the magic happens because everybody who touches Dave Wish is touched by Little Kids Rock and wants to be a part of it. So that's like the strand I always highlight to people is it's so deeply knowing the mission that everywhere you go, you become a magnet for resources.
What would you add, Christy?
I just add a few things, and I think David Bornstein has written quite a bit about this and really articulates it well. I think all social entrepreneurs have an optimism. They see a world that doesn't yet exist, and they're able to paint a picture of it for you so that you believe them. And they believe that it can be accomplished. They're also incredibly practical. And that leads to another thing. They're incredibly impatient. They can't wait for the world to catch up with them. And so sometimes with social entrepreneurs, I'm saying, well, you've got a great idea. You just have to bring us along with you because we don't yet see it, and you need to help cultivate that. They're action-oriented. So they want things to happen. We have quarterly board meetings, but we're often having, at least at the stage of Draper Richards Kaplan is, we're having interim board meetings because the pace of change is so quick. They're doubling their staff. There's opportunity management going on. And the last piece I would say, which is something that our founder talks a lot about, is empathy. So they have a sense, and Ashoka has actually got a whole program around empathy. They have a sense of, they connect with and they listen carefully to the beneficiaries and to the donors, and they're able to somehow put all those pieces together by very keenly understanding other people. And there's something really special about those collection of DNA.
So are you saying part of it is having a really good emotional intelligence? Because there's a lot of people out there who, let's say they're really smart, maybe too smart, and when they get out there, they just can't really connect because they don't have the emotional intelligence. Are you saying, is that part of empathy for you, or is that something different, do you think?
It's a combination. So I think, like when I'm on the board of Benetech, and I've been on the on that board just for some time since I've known the organization for so long, and they apply design thinking to innovating on their software. They're constantly going into the field, and that's sort of a form of it. They're asking the human rights workers and advocates, what do you need to do your job? How can I support you? How do I get this authenticated? How do I keep you secure in your job? And so they seem to meet the user where they are. But then another form of emotional intelligence, I think, is what, John, you've been so successful at, which is fundraising, which is being able to talk to a donor here in the United States who has never been to Nepal or may never go to Cambodia, and get them emotionally connected to the fact that, did you go to the library as a young child? Did you, how important were books in your life? And shouldn't children everywhere have that right? And so your ability to do that, I think, is a very important piece, because then you're imparting, you're giving them permission to join you in that journey, and they feel good about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's very important in this field, and we all know there's 1.5 million 501c3s in America. So how do you stand out? If you're one of 1.5 million, that's pretty daunting. And I think to Anne Marie's point about Little Kids Rock, I can picture Dave Wish in the Safeway telling the cashier about how great Little Kids Rock is, right? Because he's a storyteller. He likes telling a story. He's proud of it. He's good at it. And I think that one of the important things that I try to always do is just remind people that, our problems here are not like the problems in post-Khmer Rouge Cambodia or post-apartheid South Africa, where kids just don't have a chance because they don't have books, they don't have teachers, they don't have schools. But people act confused as to why 1 billion people live less than $1 a day. People act confused as to why 2 billion people live less than $2 a day. And we try to get really good at saying to people, well, if you live in Zambia, rural Zambia, and 4 out of 5 girls don't make it past grade 6, what chance do they have? No wonder people remain poor. It's not because they're dumb or because they're lazy. It's because they didn't get educated. And the reality is we're all born with the same gray matter, and it's all a matter of do we get stimulated, do we have books, do we have teachers, or not. So I think that, Anne-Marie, what you said is really important about being a storyteller. And then I think we're going to talk a bit about the amassing of resources. I think that's a really important thing, too. Let's talk, though, about, not to be Debbie Downer, but let's talk about the organizations that don't scale. Right? There's a lot of people out there, and it's really sad because there's huge problems that they're trying to attack. They devote their life to their cause, and yet they don't get to the point of scaling their organization or scaling their impact. If I could just ask you both, and I'm a player coach here, I'm supposed to be moderating, but also participating. We could each just do one thing or maybe 2 things where you see a common reason a social entrepreneur does not scale their impact. What would be the things you notice most often, if there are common things? Starting with you, Christy.
Okay. I would say that they underestimate the complexity of the problem they're trying to address, and then when they get into it, they lack focus. So the program tends to get dispersed, and we're going to start doing more of this, and then they can no longer link what is our intervention and what is the impact of that intervention. So lack of focus.
So they're trying to do too much with just too little resources and getting just spread too thin?
Yeah, and then you can't, what am I going to scale? I don't know exactly, was it ingredient A, B, or C that made the difference and that I should keep going? Or I'm so immersed now in this one community I can never leave.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I would most highlight is I think there's a sense if you hone a program really, really well, that if you build it, they will come. And the big FYI is they will not come. They will either they will not know to care. And so, and 2 things have struck me on this lately. Just this morning, I had coffee with Peter Kim at Bridgespan, who's written a lot about this, that people focus deeply on the program model and they forget to focus on the fundraising and sustainability model. And you, as the leader, own both. I'm struck by that all the time. So part of it is if you build it, they will not come unless you tell them to come, storytell around it, and you market it. And the other thing I've noticed a lot is that people, and I don't think it's because they don't want to share their ideas, but they focus so much on what's in front of them that they don't build capacity sufficiently. So whether it's that they don't bring enough people to the board, and so there can't have generative conversations, or they don't bring enough people to an advisory committee, and so their perspective is limited to their own set of knowledge. Or they don't hire enough staff, and so they're still trying to schedule meetings and do measurement and evaluation and trying to fundraise and realizing that they have barriers to their own capacity, but people do not build capacity fast enough, and then they get stuck on a raft alone. And those are 2 challenges that I see.
Yeah, I would say the common things I see would be lack of a coherent brand and a coherent kind of elevator pitch to quickly and succinctly explain what they do. Right, the NGO world is where bad brands go to die. So you gotta kind of be clear on who you are, what you're doing, and be able to say it succinctly. I think a lot of social entrepreneurs, unfortunately, spend a lot of time talking about the problem, and not enough time talking about the solution. And they're 90-10 when they should be 10-90. Right? You're talking to an intelligent audience. People know about the issues of clean water. People know about the issues women face in the developing world. People know that cancer is a terrible thing. I mean, you got to bring it up and address it, but you got to go to solution, and say, here is our solution. Here's what our solution costs, and will you be involved with our solution as an investor, as an employee, as a board member? And I think asking for the order is really important. If you're a social entrepreneur, you better be ready to ask for the order, not once a day or twice a day, but like 10, 15, 20 times a day. Ask somebody for something. It might be their frequent flyer miles, it might be free office space, it might be a donation, it might be serving as a volunteer, it might be hosting a fundraising event. But when asking is in the DNA, and I saw a social entrepreneur once, I won't say who it was somebody in one of these 2 portfolios that I was part of, and this guy said, I absolutely hate fundraising and I hate talking to funders. And I pulled him aside afterwards and I said, you better be prepared to always be small then. because you can't outsource that stuff. You as the founder have got to be good at being out and asking for the order. Let me remind you that we do have 2 ways to do questions. None of them involve Twitter or Facebook, sorry. The 2 old-fashioned ways to do questions. Number 1, we're gonna go to live and questions in about 15, 20 minutes. You're gonna stand up and we're gonna hand you a hopefully functioning microphone. Second is we have question cards, and if you do have questions, you can write them down on the question cards, hand them to the end of the aisle, and then we're gonna have people pick them up and sift through them, and they'll hand me some of the better questions that we can then ask. Let me ask you about your own course correction or your own evolution. I think one of the criticisms I would have of typical foundations is they kind of get their money, they got a lot of money, they decide to hire some people who are going to deploy 5% per year, year after year after year after year after year. Their models don't really change that much. And then there's foundations that actually act like social entrepreneurs. They evaluate what they do, they question what they do course corrections along the way. Draper Richards went through a process where you guys ended up deciding to do something very, very different from what you'd typically done and actually go out and raise outside capital, which is when Christy decided to come join you. I would love to hear from you, Anne-Marie. What led Draper Richards to decide that even though you were lauded as being extremely successful, you said it's not good enough, we have to change our model in certain ways and go out and acquire outside capital. And then Christy, you kind of come riding in on a white horse. Tell us about how you then basically said, great, you know, a multi-million dollar campaign, that is no problem. I'm ready to embrace it. So Anne-Marie, you first. What happened that made Draper Richards move in that direction?
Well, I think it was that both, you know, sometimes the world talks to you. And in this instance, we'd been in a position, as Christy mentioned, we'd raised $14 million from 2 original donors who were very entrepreneurial people. For folks who've been in California or in the Silicon Valley, being entrepreneurial is very much a mindset. So as we had funded our early organizations, the world had spoken to us in 2 ways. We watched organizations we'd funded, and John mentioned some of them. Taproot, Room to Read, Visionspring, 1 Acre Fund, Living Goods. We'd watched organizations who'd taken the money we'd provided to them, this opportunity to build capacity through a board seat, being part of a learning community. And they were really growing in pretty profound ways. Organizations would come in at a couple $100,000, they'd leave 3 years later, 1 million+ organizations, very impressive boards. But where we'd initially been getting a couple hundred applications a year, we were getting 500 and 600 applications a year. So it was becoming more and more competitive to get a Draper Richards grant. So the world was talking to us in that way. And then the second part was, as we were doing our work and we'd be out talking to philanthropists in Silicon Valley and beyond, people would on some level say, that's very compelling. And whether it was, I love the idea of leader-led philanthropy. I appreciate the idea of a team of funders actually getting in and engaging with people and trying to help them in their work. I love what you describe about the pattern recognition you see across your portfolio. Some people just like the idea that we were entirely agnostic as to topic and geography when we funded, that we looked for organizational and leader-based DNA. But we also felt like that part of the world was talking to us. So we had sort of a demand side and a supply side aspect to our work that were signaling to us that there might actually be a bigger pool for us to play in. And I'd also have to say we had a set of original donors that were open to that. So Christy can tell you more about the story, but just to visualize, Bill Draper's in his 80s, but he had supported entrepreneurs for many years and was very keen to the idea that there was, if you will, a bigger entrepreneur group and a bigger limited partner group that were out there and could actually be primed to allow our foundation to take the work that we'd been doing and bring it to a bigger group of donors.
That's right. I recall Bill saying, we have to do what we tell the social entrepreneurs to do. We have to go to scale with our model and see if it works. Now, it's a big question, will it work? Can you do this in 2 different geographies and whatnot? But I joined the organization because I saw a couple of key attributes, which is true for if you're a nonprofit organization or if you're a managed fund like we are, which is we had a proven model. We had the same strategy over, at that time, 6 to 8 years. We had a track record of incredible organizations, Room to Read, Kiva, 1 Acre Fund. We had the same staff, and we had a visionary board that had lots of relationships. And we had what I think of as a unique offering, or why I joined, because I thought it was a very unique offering. In the investment world, if you want to get into a stock fund, there's mutual funds. You could go domestic, early stage, later stage. There's there are very few funds like that in philanthropy. So what we were offering was, here's a seed fund. You give us $1 million over 5 years, and you will be one of a handful of donor partners who have access and can, sort of claim responsibility for the funds the organizations we've already funded, which is about 30 organizations, and the 50 more that we're going to fund. And out of that pool of 80 social entrepreneurs, we hope we're going to have some outstanding winners. And we hope, too, that some of them will be the organizations that you connect with. And so our feeling is this is a great vehicle, in particular for venture capitalists who understand this model, as well as entrepreneurs who had funded innovation in their own world. We came into this 3 years ago and thought we would start with 15 million. We had a commitment, half committed by our board. And then we got a commitment from Rob Kaplan. We added his name to the door, much to my surprise. And one of my lessons learned was I didn't think people would give us money with Draper Richards Kaplan on the door if your name wasn't Draper Richards Kaplan. But I was wrong. People loved the brand. They thought that we really had something special, and they wanted to be part of it. And we quickly were at 31 million. And we also created a sense of urgency. So there was a sense that there were only going to be so many partners in the fund, and that if you wanted to get in, now is the time to do it. And so I think we've created a unique offering, and now our job is to store those donors, keep them engaged, and connect them with the social entrepreneurs.
So help us make that leap, though. So you had a goal of 15 million. That was obviously a very ambitious goal. And then you somehow overachieved on it by a pretty broad. So how? What people in here who want to raise capital, what can they learn from your experience? Tell us how you went from ambitious to double ambitious.
Well, it happened in a phone call, which is that.
Take that call.
Yeah, take that call. Right. So.
Sorry.
Rob Kaplan had met one of our social entrepreneurs, Abby Fallick, who is a student of his at Harvard Business School when she was launching Global Citizen Year. And she said, and I remember being in the kitchen, she said, oh, Christy, when you start raising that fund, you should talk to this professor, Harvard Business School. I said, well, yeah, we'll get to Boston eventually. No, you really should talk to him. So, we had plenty of Bill and Robin's friends. And so, Rob just called Anne Marie. And you want to tell that part?
Well, I do, because what he had really wanted to do, what he believed, was start an incubator here in New York that was going to support early stage nonprofits. And he had started the Teak Fellowship, so had a vision of what that could look like because he'd done Teak. And we talked for a while, and he was asking me about capacity building, what sort of program I would offer if I were him. And finally I said, well, why don't you just give your money to us? And he said, you would take my money? And I didn't laugh, which is what I was tempted to do, but instead said, I think it would really be terrific if you came and spent a day with us in California. And he did, and he came and spent time with Bill and Robin and our team, and we introduced him to entrepreneurs, and he came a second time as well. He was quite diligent, and we appreciated that. And we were really diligent too. But I think in the end, for him, it really was a build-buy kind of decision. And I think he recognized that the team, the model that we built, the caliber of the entrepreneurs that were in the portfolio was really appealing to him. And if he were to build something, maybe it would be a little bit different. But I think if you were to look at the impact that he would be able to have with his investment, that this would be a pretty significant opportunity for him. And you might want to talk about some of the terms he put around that, because I think
before you do that, though, can we also point out that he's just not any old HBS professor, right? This guy is a pre-IPO Goldman Sachs partner who's transitioned to being an HBS professor. So we should just be clear about that what this guy had in his pocket was.
When someone says, you should really talk to this person, and you hear like their first description, do your homework.
Yes.
Figure it out. But if I could just, the fascinating thing was I joined Draper Richards, and Bill's saying, do you really think, Bill Draper, do you really think people are going to want to do this, and I should call my friends, and yep, do you think we should do $1 million? Wow, that's a big ask. Rob Kaplan comes in. So he's an investment banker, very successful, at Harvard Business School, which is where Bill went to graduate school. So he knows all the same people. He comes in and says, I really believe in what you're doing. And guess what? That was a huge validator. So we were immediately then at $12 million, and we'd only had 3 or 4 conversations. So just as a university would raise funds, we said, okay, that's sort of our initial capital commitment. Let's double that and go for 25. And then we got to 18, and then it started to just, momentum started to build. And quite frankly, high net worth people thought we were going to close, and they weren't going to be part of it. So much so, my favorite moment was when my colleague, Jenny Schilling-Stein, we go to lunch with somebody, and they'd given a fairly substantial gift. And so we just outlined what we were doing, and that the fund was, we were at 22, or, we were literally the person's, I say, chasing her down the street, running after her after lunch, and said, well, aren't you going to ask me for money? The donor, and she said, well, if this is for you, we'd love to chat with you. And they said, well, yes, I don't want you to close. I really want to be part of it. And so we created some urgency by saying this is going to be a fund. It's going to be a certain size. There are only going to be a limited number of donor partners. Those partners will come to our retreat. They'll have special access to us, the staff, but more importantly to our social entrepreneurs. And I actually hope that they'll have access to each other, and that they might actually be inspired by each other, but we haven't figured that out.
So you offered them exclusivity, right? Limited number. It always works well with really wealthy people to let them think it's like a country club. It's really hard to get into. You offered them a gutsy minimum, right? Bold goals attract bold people. We know that. You offer them a benefits package, right? You're going to come to this retreat. You're going to meet these young social entrepreneurs. It's really exciting. And I think you're offering them, there's this whole notion that a lot of people, I think it was Peter Reiling at Aspen Institute, I first heard it from, where people at a certain point in time, they need to go from success to significance. They've had success, they need to feel significant. I think you're giving your investors that also. We want to go to some live questions and some, if anybody who has the stuff on paper wants to drop a few in my lap, I'll ask those questions too. Let's go to a little bit of a lightning round, okay? Let me ask each of you one thing. If somebody in this audience wants to eventually be a Draper Richards Fellow, let's say a year from now, 2 years from now, and you could offer them only one piece of succinct advice, what would it be?
I'm going to assume that you yourself have, so I guess I would make this observation. At Draper Richards, 80% of it's about the entrepreneur and 20% is about the model. Because you can always tinker with a model, and the world changes and the model needs to change anyway. So I'm going to go down the path that you actually have the resilience, the tenacity, the grit, the willingness to ask, the willingness to bring people to your work. And I would say, with all that said, that I would focus on the model in a diligent, intelligent way. Because I think one of the things we often see is, as Christy mentioned, this divergence, this inability to accept the fact that the world is incredibly complex, and what your goal is, one of the best things you can do is bound down your work and be able to understand why each choice you make affects the work that you do. And so when I talk to folks, that's the place I try to get to almost right away, is what are the choices you're making every day and the trade-offs you're making every day that are getting you closer to understanding your model and then building impact. And so I guess that's the piece of advice I'd give, is discipline and diligence around whatever the model is you're trying to create.
I would just say start asking great questions and keep asking questions. Why is that so? Get to the root cause of the problem you're trying to solve, deeply understand it, and work backwards from there to design your solution. And keep an open mind and be honest with funders when you're early, right? I think this might be true. That's my hypothesis, right? And here's why I believe that. And because we're actually looking at how you're thinking and how you take in information and how you make decisions.
I'll never forget first meeting Bill Draper, because Bill didn't ask a single question about our model. I literally brought a sleeping bag into my office the day I heard that Bill was coming in the next afternoon to study our business plan. And I was like, we don't have a business plan. I better stay up all night creating one. And it was 38 pages. It was literally hot off the printer when Bill and Jenny walked into our office, because literally we had fragments of a business plan. We never actually put the whole thing together. And then he proceeds to spend the first 30 minutes asking me, where did you grow up? What did your parents do? What kind of values did your parents? It's all this stuff that wasn't even in the business plan at all. And I'm like, don't you want to go through the business plan? And he's like, no, the business plan does not matter. if you're not a great entrepreneur. And he said, I bet on the entrepreneur. I want to know who you are, what values you were raised with, whether you're tenacious or not. Now, Jenny had actually tried to test my tenacity, because when I first showed up at Draper Richards, having had 15 different foundations tell me that Room to Read was too small to fund, Jenny then told me 10 minutes in our conversation that we were too far advanced for Draper Richards. We were too big. We couldn't apply for early stage funding because we were actually a mid-stage. And I fought her on that and said, I'm not leaving your office. I'm going through my business plan with you. I need this fellowship. I need this $300,000. And it turned out that she had a method to her madness, right? She said, this guy worked at Microsoft. He had a huge team reporting to him. He didn't face a lot of hardship because it's a monopoly product. The sales team's out selling it. And he's now in a different world. He's in the NGO world, and he's chasing dollars from foundations that have short attention spans. So she's just basically trying to test my tenacity. So I tell you that, so when somebody tries to kick you out of their office, refuse to get kicked out of the office. Just say no. Put your foot down and say, I'm staying. You need to hear my story. Because it will happen. People will try to blow you off, but you can't let it happen. Let me ask you a question about either one of you or both of you. Where have you seen a social entrepreneur who's made really effective use of their board to accomplish something as a team they would not have been able to do on their own?
I was thinking about Visionspring, and I always like to use different examples, which is why I was trying to think that through. But what Jordan has done, which is really smart, is he's really focused on having a board that's very international. It understands a lot of different aspects of their work. They have people who know the optometric space. They have people that understand manufacturing. They have people that understand distribution. They have people that understand sales. They have people that understand multi-level marketing. So if you sort of actually take that work and pull it out into its core components and the different aspects that sort of build to strategy, they've built a team of people that can speak to all those different aspects. And so when you have a generative conversation, which is really what boards are about, right? Like people say, I wish my board were better fundraisers. Yeah, everybody wants that. But in the end, what you'd really love to have is a board that pushes you on vision, that asks what's possible, where our resources can best be deployed to make that happen, what's long-term, what's short-term. That's the conversation you want that group to have. And Jordan has built an incredibly elegantly creative board that allows him to ask questions that are very, very far-reaching. And that's where I've seen that done the strongest. The other board I think is really good is the Refuge Point. Refuge Point is an organization out of Boston that works with very, very at-risk refugees in Africa and brings them to safety and development missions. And what his board has really pushed him to do is not just ask, why is that work important? Because it is. But what does that mean on the international arena? How can you actually then engage UNHCR, the UN Commission on High Refugees, to fundamentally change the way refugees are seen throughout the world by using the work that they do as a negotiating power? And that's what his board brought to him. I thought that was very powerful, is to ask, if we can do this, and from a direct service perspective, what does an indirect lever create that when we have power to make certain choices? And I was really impressed that his board found that lever.
I would just go back to College Summit. So Chuck Harris, who was an investment banker, who was actually co-head of investment banking with Rob Kaplan, our Rob Kaplan. He was on the board of College Summit, and the director of development went on maternity leave. And he said, well, I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for international organizations. I'll be your development director for 3 months. How hard can that be? And he came into College Summit, and he said, what do you mean you raise funds every year? And you try, and it gets bigger every year, and there's no commitment. This is crazy. How do you grow an organization? And so he created a growth fund. And it ended up that since Skoll's money was unrestricted and it was $1 million, it was a $15 million growth campaign. Chuck Harris ran it. They raised money to fund their growth campaign, so they wrote a private placement, which is something that Visionspring has done, some kind of prospectus document. And it was a transformational experience, I think, for that board, because it was an entrepreneur. It was one of the board members that truly understood how challenging it was to raise money. And then they also changed the business plan for College Summit. They said, well, how do we pick the communities that we go into, the school districts that we work with? And they said, why don't we run a competition every year and have people competing for the right to have us bring our program into their region? So they actually pulled out of one of the regions that they were in. They closed it down because the district just wasn't a partner. So they said, we have to have a school partner. We have to have local philanthropy. We have to have a college in the local area that will host the college admissions days. We have to have board support. And then they had each community applying. So they fundamentally changed how the organization thought about scale and thought about acquisition.
Great, thank you. I don't know where the microphones are, but we're going to go to a couple of live questions. I'm going to ask the questioners for two things. One, ask the question of one of us and one of us only. You choose. We're going to go to a little bit of a lightning round. And second, succinct direct questions are better than non-succinct, indirect, rambling statements. Who's got a question?
So I actually have two questions.
You can only ask one.
Oh, that's rough. But
pick the better of the two.
Okay. So my first question, and I guess this is for Ms. Burgoyne, is what do you think about the lack of collaboration and resource sharing across the board in the field of social entrepreneurship, and also the redundancies of some organizations, especially in like environmental agencies, and what should be done about this, and how can a college student in particular have an impact?
Wow, that's actually a lot of questions. One question.
Just pick.
I will.
Just pick one of them.
And I guess what I would observe is I actually believe that there's a lot less collaboration than people say there is on one level. I actually see an enormous amount of collaboration in the nonprofit space. I will say I feel like there is a really distinct challenge when people think about the audiences they serve, and people really parse down audiences in really narrow ways, which I think can be challenging. But I do think there's a lot of collaboration. And I think what I would say is this. If I was a college student or I was a graduate student and I was looking for a job, I wouldn't start a new organization unless I felt that the vision I had was so profound. And when I actually worked that through, the change that I could create was so significant, not only in a direct service level, but in an indirect way from a systemic perspective, that if I didn't start that organization, the world would be different. But to me, it starts with people looking at organizations that they think they can join and they can be effective in, and going and doing that. There's a lot of good things happening, and I think people ignore that in the desire to actually have individual agency. But I would also say I actually see a lot more collaboration than people that are 3 steps away and trying to be dramatic or lead us through.
Great, next question. Can you stand up and step to where people can see you, please? We are filming this.
One aspect of scaling that makes me nervous is becoming donor dependent. As organizations grow and chase the money, they can get short-sighted, project-oriented, and shift their mission to meet the money. How would you prepare entrepreneurs to stay true to their participant stakeholders and not drown out their voice with donor demands?
We see this all the time. There's opportunity management that you have to do, but I think if you are clearly focused on your intended impact that you're hoping to have, the change you're hoping to have, you just need to do what Dave Wish does and what John Wood does, is continue to talk to donors about that and a wide range of donors, because if you find a donor who's aligned with the kind of change or the future world you see, they're going to be with you for the long term. Whereas if you are an agent, or really being secured to be, I don't know, a service provider to them, you're gonna do that one job, and then they're gonna be gone. So we do often, and we also, we look at how close is the alignment, and then how close is the burden that each organization puts on, a funder puts on its grantees. So we are not an ideal funder for every organization, for every entrepreneur. So, we are very involved at a very early stage, and some people embrace that, and others do not, and that is okay.
I would just add to that really quickly. I think that any organization, when it's young, has to be really good at defining not just what it's going to do, but what it's not going to do. You need to make sure you percolate that throughout the entire organization, so people know that it's okay to say no. You have to, especially if you're an early employee or a founder or a co-founder or an executive, you have to live it and breathe it. Because if you tell your staff that you're going to avoid scope creep, but then you go off and actually start scope creeping, then it tells people that it's okay to do it. And I'll just give you a quick example of this. We have all the time, I'm very proud of the fact that our organization's opened over 1,500 schools and over 13,000 libraries. Now, one of the things we've done is we've said no to people when they say, I want to go over with my church group or my family or my graduate school classmates, and we want to build a school for the local people. We say no. The people in Cambodia and Bangladesh and South Africa and Zambia, they're not lazy. They don't need a school built for them. We have to get the local people involved so that they feel that sense of pride, ownership, and the project is sustainable. And people in the developing world, those parents who are cash-strapped, quite often there's one thing they can do and one thing only, and that's dig the foundation or pick up the hammer and pound the nails. So I think it's being very good at respectfully telling people, no, that is not our model, we will not do that. And we've lost donors as a result of that. They say, well, this other group over there will let my kids go pound the nails. Well, that's great. That's not our model, and I think we have to be clear on what our model is and have the self-confidence to say no. Say it diplomatically and respectfully, but say it firmly.
We did that too. We had donors saying, well, would you fund only international in this area working on this? And we said, nope, our funds need to be restricted. We're looking for the best social entrepreneurs. You're either in for that or not.
Yeah.
So we turn money down too.
What else? Yes, hi.
So building on that point in a way, and I just already addressed this question to you. You spoke earlier about entrepreneurs who had failed at scale, and when they don't focus on and really understand what it takes. And in my work, which is supporting nonprofits who want to go to scale, I see so much pressure and popularity around the idea of the importance of the randomized controlled trial as evidence of impact, and it's not to it's not to malign that at all, but to say that I don't think it really teaches us what works when and under what circumstances, or the point about people in the home countries need to be involved in developing these facilities. That's a part of your model. That's a core element of your model. So my question is, what are your thoughts about supporting a valuation that shows the critical elements of success, really getting people to understand these are the non-negotiables of our models? Because RCT, while it's important, doesn't teach us that.
So I think random control trials have a place, but definitely not in the early stage organizations that we're funding. So what we have seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anne-Marie, but it's Room to Read is doing that at 10 years, and grassroots soccer is doing that at 10 years out. When they have enough data that it's actually statistically significant to do a randomized control. And by the way, it's very expensive, and it takes a long time. So, what we look for in these early days are rapid prototyping. What are the core elements of your model? Can you define them very crisply? And then if you are in, say, 2 different schools or 2 different communities and you change one of those variables, does the impact change? And we're often looking at early indicators. So, is school attendance increasing for those students? Are their grades increasing maybe on an interim assessment? Because we won't have the data for their year-long, till 3 months after they're out of school. And then we'll analyze it, and those kids are gone. So we look for a really high sense of experimentation in the early days and defining each essential element so that then you can vary those elements and see what's working and get into causal relationships. If I change one thing, how does that work?
I was just going to say, I think you have to believe your intuitions are true. I mean, you have to believe that if kids show up at school more, they're probably doing better. I think you have to believe that if farmers are growing more crops, they're probably not as hungry. So I think one of the things people struggle with is this, this sense that you have to have empirical data to support things that 99% of the population believe is true. And 10 years out, when you have the money, the data points, the organizational wherewithal to do a different kind of analysis, that's very important. And that's when you become a field builder and a leader. But using your core intuition in the early years, I think is extremely valid, and I think has become undervalued as we have become so impact hungry.
We were in a board meeting once, and Dr. Fernando Reimers, who is the Ford Professor of International Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, there was a discussion going on, and he cut to the heart of it, and he said, more books has never led to less literacy. and here's the guy, a tenured Harvard professor that you thought would be like insisting that we spend. He said, don't right now, when you're young, spend too much money on evaluation and monitoring. He said, spend some money on it, but be careful, because if all of a sudden it's a slippery slope, you can be pouring millions of dollars into monitoring what you do, but doing a lot less of it because you now have millions of dollars less than you would have had otherwise. There's a question submitted on a card. I'll be happy to take this one, and then Anne Marie or Christy, if you have anything to add, we can do it. I'll do a lightning round on this one. What are some of the best practices for leaders balancing the demands of being outward/donor facing and being program/staff facing? Is there a tension? I would say yes, definitely. I think certain people, certain types like to be, you look at a Myers-Briggs personality test. If someone's an E extrovert, they're probably better off being outward facing. If someone's an I introvert, they're probably better off being in an internal role. I think for any social entrepreneur, you have to know very quickly which of those two things are you better at and which are you more passionate about. And certain people are more passionate about being externally facing. That's fine. You hire somebody who's internally facing. I'd say the opposite is a little bit harder. If a social entrepreneur is an introvert, it's a little bit harder to hire the person who's going to go out and raise the capital and be a spokesperson, because a lot of people do want to talk to the founder or the co-founder. So I do think there is a tension between that, but the good news is that if any organization grows, I think the founder has to very quickly decide which of those two things do they want to be, and then they better hire for the one they don't want to be. They better delegate, and they better stay the heck out of that person's way so that that person can actually do what they need to do, whether it's an internal role or an external role.
I guess the one observation I would make is that we've thought a lot about complementarity over time as a foundation. So we had a theory a number of years ago that founders should hire COOs. That was our very simple theory, which in many organizations had worked actually really well. Visionspring. And then we came across folks over time that didn't work as well. It felt a little bit like an artificial solution. And what we discovered over time was that it really was about complementarity with the founder. I mean, the nice thing about being the founder is you're like the anchor tenant in the mall, right? Like everything else gets planned around you, how traffic flow works, what kind of variety of things are in the mall. But you do have to have a clear vision of what you're good at and what you like to do. So the CEO-COO thing is actually pretty functional, but we have folks in the portfolio where their complement is a development director. Their complement is a head of program. Their complement is actually kind of a chief of staff. And over time, I think we've learned to recognize and respect that is a really valid way to build a model. But I agree with John. The people that have failed in those models are not the people who haven't disaggregated who those people are. It's that they haven't then given them the room to run and be the people that they're capable of being. Because most of the people who do those jobs have enormous opportunity costs. Like, I'd like to think that some of you in this room will want to be that person. Maybe today, maybe in 10 years after you've had your terrific career in consulting, banking, brand, or working at some company, those people are out there walking around, but they are deeply competent, and when they finally show up in these enterprises, they do need the space to grow and move around.
Yeah, yeah. Question, you can choose one of them or both, but for both of you, number one, what keeps you awake at night? Number two, what makes you jump out of bed in the morning excited?
I'm awake at night hoping that our donors are as excited about the Social Entrepreneurs we fund as we are, and that they'll join us in the future and that they'll tell our friends. So I'm awake at night thinking, like, how do we share that excitement with our donor community and bring other people into it? And I jump out of bed every morning because it is such an honor to meet, even the 100 people that I'll talk to in a year who think they can change the world. And I can't imagine doing anything else. It is so meaningful to have been a small part of Room to Read and to think that there are 5 million kids that are reading today. It's so moving. This is such a fulfilling job, and I feel so fortunate.
And what gets me out of bed, and I think we share, and I think if you talk to anyone on our staff, they would say this, we feel incredibly blessed to do this work. I think we feel like we're at a really interesting axis What gets me out of bed is we get to do enormous amounts of board service. And I love board service. I'm like a board service geek. And I love getting together with groups of people and exploring with them how to make an organization strong. It's like a team sport. I'm not really very athletic, but that is sort of my team sport. And the thing that keeps me awake at night, although I would have to say having in our house a dog, 2 full-time jobs, and 2 children is very little keeps me awake at night, actually.
She was out cold on the flight.
I fell asleep in the airport waiting for the red eye. But what does keep me awake is I recognize that for us, we're in a position to actually build systemic ways to support organizations. So if you think board development is important, how do you create a system where you could get 12 awesome people to join your 12 organizations you funded this year? Or if you can get to a position where we can raise $30 million for the foundation, how can we find $30 million in follow-on funding for the organizations in the portfolio? And that's one of the things I think about a lot is, can we do something systemic that takes the resources that are like this far away from us and bring it into the portfolio?
What I love about hearing you two talk is, I mean, first of all, you two working together has brought 2 of my favorite people in the field together to be an incredibly even more effective team, and something that I really believe in because I'm a product of Draper Richards. But also the way that you've done it, Anne Marie, you and Jenny and Bill and Robin, but especially Jenny, you've done it in such an egoless way. You haven't said, oh, this is ours, we can't let someone else come in, or we can't, you know, you looked at Christy and said, you're going to raise $15 million? Hallelujah, sister, go out and raise it. It means we can deploy more money to more social entrepreneurs at a young age. And I like that example, is I think that sometimes in the social entrepreneurship space, people have so much ego. And there's just this fear of, if you bring more people in, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be the grand poobah anymore. We're going to have somebody else. And I've always said at Room to Read, I've always said to people, I don't want to be the leader of an organization. I want to be one of many, many, many leaders of a global movement. And that's one reason we've gotten bigger. But what I think is really cool about seeing you two on stage is that you now at Draper Richards Kaplan have bigger goals than ever before, but you have even more energy. And you had a lot of energy, but now you have even more energy. So therefore, you're going to accomplish those goals. Like that, that's just done, right? Whatever your plan is for the next 3 years, I'm assuming it's going to happen because you've got the right people and you've got. So then, what comes after that?
Well, I'll tell you, I believe that social entrepreneurship, we don't have enough people funding innovation in the sector. We don't have enough managed funds. So when Jeff Skoll said, I'm interested in social entrepreneurship, he called Bill Drayton, who started Ashoka. You would have thought they might have been competitive, but no. Bill Drayton said, I'm thrilled that you're going to come into social entrepreneurship. There's so much we could accomplish together. You, Jeff, know brands. You built eBay. You know this new sector. Come along with us. And guess what? Ashoka is now in excess of 30 million. They were not that size. Echoing Green said, Gerald Dorsey said to us, if you guys can raise that money, I'm going to go talk to my board. And I was like, great. Well, you know, I know a few of your board members. I'm going to talk to them too, because they should raise money. New Profit gave us help. New Schools gave us help. Robinhood, Tipping Point. We're all sharing stories. In fact, it was those development directors that said, ask for $1 million. You can do it. You can absolutely do it. And we were inspired by Acumen's 100 million, by New Profit's 100 million. We are on the cusp of something really exciting, and I'm thrilled that so many of you are interested in this sector, because we need social entrepreneurs, we need the worker bees, we need the funders, we need the program officers, we need all of you. We need more capital. We need more resources.
And social entrepreneurs out there need more Draper Richards, they need more of Skoll, they need more of Ashoka. I mean, it's a good symbiosis. Let me ask you one final question. Any final thoughts to the audience?
That's mine. We're going to change the world.
anything that you wanted to say that we didn't get to? I realize that's a really inelegant final question. I can pick another final question if you like. Can we shut the videotape off?
It just feels sort of time.
Well, the only thing I would say is, I mean, I remember sitting at school. No one knew what social entrepreneurship was. We were going to build the brand. The Catherine Reynolds Center hasn't started yet. I mean, there weren't courses around social entrepreneurship. major in it. People didn't go into it as a career. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the future and about social entrepreneurship being more than a trend. It's actually a movement. And I think, you know, John, you've been a big part of that, and I'm thrilled to see so many courses just getting, and young people, you know, all of you getting active in the world.
The two resources that are most constrained in the field, and we've highlighted one, which is capital. The other is people, which we've intimated but haven't said explicitly. And that's people across a wide array of opportunities. But whether it's strong senior leadership, whether it's board members that come in are deeply committed. I mean, we were talking earlier today, a great board chair should spend 20 to 30% of their waking week working with the organization. A good board member should be engaged, I would argue, 4 to 6 hours a week in their board work. I'm struck by the fact that there's still an enormous amount of intellectual capital in the United States, which hasn't been deployed to creating social good. And I think it's actually lack of knowledge. It's lack of exposure. It's not lack of good intent. And then there's a bunch around lack of certain training. But I would say all of you are in a position to be part of that movement of people who choose for their entire lives to deploy a certain amount of your energy, regardless of where that is in the constellation of need, to really helping organizations to find their true north. Because so much of this is not about continuing to find innovative ideas. That's a piece of it. But each of those ideas needs to be nurtured. It needs to be explored. It needs to be resourced. Some number of them need to be closed, right? And it takes even stronger leadership to close something down than it does to start something up, actually. And so that, to me, would be one of the other big pleas is to really find your own personal resource and find your place where you think that you can make a difference and deploy yourself to that place with as much energy as you put in to your other hobbies and family things and work things.
Yeah, and I would just close just one quick thing is to say that anybody in this room, if you have a dream, even if you're small, don't let that stop you, right? When Reed, our first year, we were $35,000 of fundraising. Second year, $165,000. Third year, $735,000. Fourth year, we hit $1.4 million. But it started literally with like a $35,000 a year, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know how to fundraise. I had no education background. I knew how to market software. Wow, that's helpful. No, I mean, not at all when you're trying to do. But I just got out there and did it. You know, we were saying at Reed GSD, which is get shit done, right? And there's just days you just have to GSD 5, 10, 15 times a day, and you can get caught up. You know, you can get caught up sitting in front of your computer, doing the 18th iteration of your business model and your deck and all that stuff, but it doesn't really do any good because if the deck's sitting on your hard drive, that's potential energy. It's only when you actually take your deck out and start shopping it that it can turn into kinetic energy. So I would say, you know, we should hit 45 million this year at Room to Read if the next 71 days are good for us, are good to us with the end of year fundraising season. Think about how much good you could do with $45 million. Keep in mind, 12 years ago, it was 35,000. So you just got to get started, and you got to scale it, and you got to keep growing it and growing it and growing it and growing it. But even if you're going to start small, doesn't matter. The important thing is start fast, start with passion, start with self-confidence. And there's a lot of great people like Christy and Anne-Marie and Skoll and Draper Richards Kaplan who are looking for good people and get behind you. And there's a lot of money out there. So don't let the lack of capital be an excuse. Just get out there and ask for the order. Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Anne-Marie, for catching up.